Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss productivity tactics that work for neurodivergent individuals.
Every episode, we interview guests with lived experience of neurodiversity who also have a solid productivity and habit game, and pass the learnings on to you, our wise and benevolent audience.
We're your hosts, Jeremy and Joey.
I'm Joey, and I coach creatives to get moving on their most ambitious projects through the power of solid habits and strong focus. I'm also a perpetual student of psychology and perpetually on a quest to a one-armed chin-up.
And I'm Jeremy, a neurospicy software developer turned startup founder, building the Focus Bear app to help people with ADHD and autism thrive at work. My cool party trick is leaving parties early so I can get to sleep in time for my 2-hour-long morning routine. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a focus enhancement app for ADHDers. That's adults with both combined autism and ADHD. I'm Jeremy, I'm an ADHDer myself. I'm the founder of Focus Bear and also one of the hosts of this podcast. I built Focus Bear for myself originally because I was constantly getting distracted by my phone and my laptop. I wanted a way to tame my ADHD monkey mind so I'd stop going down rabbit holes and actually get work done, but also get off my computer and my phone in the evening so I'd be able to sleep properly. It's working perfectly for me and it's helping a lot of ADHDs as well. I'd love for you to try it. It's available for Mac, Windows, iOS and Android, and it leverages most of the productivity strategies we talk about on the podcast. You can jump onto focusbear.io or just Google Focus Bear and try it out. Let me know what you think. Welcome to episode number 79 of the Focus and Chill podcast. We're thrilled to be joined by Samantha Stein today. Samantha, known as YoSandySam on YouTube, received an autism diagnosis aged 33 and an ADHD diagnosis shortly after. She began making videos on YouTube in order to process the diagnosis, but also as a way of explaining to the neurotypicals around her that even though she doesn't look autistic, she still is, and this is why. Her videos gained popularity with other neurodivergent viewers and have amassed over 14 million views. In 2022, she published the workbook So You Think You're Autistic, and she is currently signed with a publisher to write a book about neurodivergence and trauma, expected 2026. She works with neurodivergent business owners as a strategist and mentor, and this year hosted the first ever Wild Brains retreat in the Netherlands. She absolutely cannot stick to just one thing, and I look forward to talking about many different things as we speak with her today. She lives in the Netherlands with her husband, 2 kids, and cats. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so we're keen to hear a bit to start off with about your diagnosis journey. When did you realize, around the timing of your first child, I believe, what was it like in terms of finding out and what happened from there?
I think looking back, I probably knew something was up my whole life. I always had this feeling that I don't want to say not like other girls, but I really was not like most people around me. And so this kind of inherent, isolation or just difference was with me my whole life. I really internalized a lot of the differences as being less than with a lot of shame. And I did a psychology degree where we learned about autism being the extreme male brain kind of model. Didn't relate to that description of autism at all. And then went through my 20s with mental health problems, depression, anxiety. At one point, I did pick up on, maybe I've got ADD, the inattentive, because I couldn't possibly be hyperactive, which is funny, but I can tell you about that later. And then I went through life. I did the life things like getting married, and then I had my first child. And the energy, the intensity of being pregnant and postpartum period of life in terms of energy was absolutely huge. And I wasn't able to cope in the same way that I had been masking. I wasn't able to mask socially as much anymore. And I really thought what's wrong with me? While also having this deep feeling that it wasn't like this was something new. This was something that had always been there. It was just, I couldn't fake it anymore. And I'm struggling to think of exact timings, but I think when my son was around 1 was when I was pursuing the diagnosis. And I thought I still had such an imposter syndrome about it. I thought I must be so good at masking, like she's never going to diagnose me. This is going to be awful, really. So I went to the appointment with a 7-page Google Doc of a list of all the things, which is, in hindsight, the most autistic thing that you can do, really. Neurotypicals don't make, like, in detail the Google Docs with linking parts to other passages. They just don't. And then at the end, she said, yeah, it was a pretty easy diagnosis to make. And I was, oh, was it? Was it? You know, you get your diagnosis, it's a little bit of a anticlimax, really, because you just think, now what? Okay, I'm autistic. What does that mean? So, yeah, as you mentioned in the introduction, I thought, well, I could make some videos on YouTube. I'd always wanted to do YouTube. I thought it was really cool that their model of paying creators. And I thought that would be really nice to have a bit of cash on the side and like grow my channel and talk about autism and psychology and all these kind of things. The diagnosis led into that because it gave me something really exciting for me to talk about.
Yeah, and I guess you probably dispelled some of the myths in terms of looking autistic and extreme male brain, things like that. But are those some of the messages that you talk about on the channel?
Yeah, I mean, the extreme male brain was really just one kind of theory, but I think that the channel really looks at more of like stereotypes, which are not entirely false all the time. Obviously, there are young white boys who are autistic, who like trains. Like those stereotypes do exist, but that's not the only way to be autistic. And I wouldn't like to think, oh, well, my way is a better way or my way is more common or anything like that. There are so many different ways to be autistic. And that's why I think it's great that I suppose in the last 5 years, especially, more and more creators have been able to get online and publish content explaining more about their perspective and their point of view. I was on a podcast the other day and I said, in terms of diversity, we aren't really there with representation online yet, but it is getting better. It's going in the right direction because especially the apps that have evolved since before I started, when there was a little bit of a barrier to creating content on YouTube because phones weren't quite there yet and TikTok wasn't around yet. But now it is really easy for almost anyone to make that content, especially if they have a bit of support. So the barriers, the technology barriers have come down, the cost barriers have come down. And I think in terms of representation, we're going in the right direction. We're not there yet.
By representation, do you mean in terms of the ethnicity, cultural background, support levels, gender areas think is less represented at the moment?
I think probably racial and cultural, because that has a very big impact on, first of all, like cultural attitudes to mental health and neurodiversity can be very different. Always coming at it from the perspective of the Western world has really become a very therapy speech is part of everyday life now. It's become very accepted, like everybody's got anxiety or something like this. But in a lot of cultures, it's seen as something very shameful. Even it's a Western thing to have autism or something like that. Like this allergies, there are some cultures where they're like, oh, you don't have an allergy because that's a Western thing or something. It's really important to understand. So what does this mean for autistic people in this culture? Especially when culturally, for example, I live in the Netherlands, where culturally people are known to be really straight talking. There's not ambiguity. You would think for autistic people that would result in like, oh, well, this is easier to communicate with people because everybody's very direct and we don't dance around. But obviously, I grew up in the UK and I was raised there, I was born there. So my mask, the mask that I developed alongside the autism was related really specifically to UK culture. So actually, I do struggle with the directness of the Dutch because I don't know how to deal with it. Even though I understand what they're saying, I don't know how I should then react because I learned how to react with the sort of like, I suppose, slightly mean, banterish sort of attitude of the British. The cultural nuances, and obviously, I can't speak for any culture that I hadn't grown up or whatever, but I think that's a really big one. And, autism is really dominated by the English-speaking world as well. And then you talk to somebody, I don't know, in Brazil or in Germany or something. Even in Germany, it's right next door to the Netherlands, but in the German language, like all of these books on autism that have been published, not all of them have been translated into German, And so that's exactly why I ended up having my workbook translated into Portuguese, because she said, none of these books that you listed as resources are available in Portuguese. I thought, what? So there isn't that information. There certainly isn't that much of a creator influence. A lot of people talking about autism online in a lot of countries. So I think that's really, when I talk about diversity, I guess it's more like in a global sense, a racial and cultural diversity. Of course, support needs is also another big one. And I'm not qualified to talk on someone who has significant support needs. So I think as creators, the best thing that you can do is try and lift up these voices when you find them and not generalize what you're saying. Say, all autistics do this, and this is what autism is, because it's such a diverse condition, and things that you struggle with, others might not, and vice versa.
Yeah, very true. I love that Dr. Stephen Shaw quote that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And yeah, it's great that you did the translation. I've been doing some work recently in El Salvador with university students there, looking at just even providing some basic awareness around ADHD and autism, because there's very little at the moment. There's not really any services available, and it makes me think about what you were just saying there in terms of the cultural side of it, but also how difficult it is then if there's not a lot of people around you who are already talking about it. That perpetuates the being the weird one sort of feeling, compared to if there's a lot more voices out there. It's great to hear about the translations. Going back to when you were seeking diagnosis, I found it interesting in terms of the masking breaking down around the time of, I guess, having the additional executive functioning load of becoming a mother. Would you say that was part of it, that just became a lot harder and the things that you were doing in the past to cope no longer worked?
Before you're a parent, or if you don't have children, if you kind of overdo it one day or 1 week or whatever, you take Saturday off and you sleep the whole day, that's not a possibility anymore. So you overdo it, and then your kid keeps you up all night, and then you think, oh my gosh, am I ever going to sleep again? So I think becoming a parent, the sleep thing is a really big one, especially if you are neurodivergent and a parent. I'm going to tell you this now. This is my words of wisdom. I know I was supposed to wait till the end, but there's a very high chance you're going to have neurodivergent kids, okay? And neurodivergent kids are great. As babies, they can be really difficult, notorious for sleep problems especially. If you've got kids with sleep problems, you need a support network around you, because going through it, even with two of you, I can't imagine people going through it as a single parent, but even with two of us, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough of us to deal with the issues that our kids had. And my second was kind of a screamer. She did have reflux, which eventually was diagnosed, but then I read a little bit more about ADHD in babies. People don't get diagnosed until later. You don't diagnose ADHD in a baby, but there are some things that they show even then. And one of them is like extreme emotional volatility, which was absolutely my daughter, because I know that she's in pain, but it was the inability for her to calm herself down, even with, parents there and stuff like that. So neurodivergent kids, when they're babies, the baby phase can be really, really harder than potentially a neurotypical child or baby would be. And then you having decreased, like you said, the load on executive function just becomes too much. And basically, for me, my experience was that it was just, I'm trying to think, the metaphor is the bucket. The bucket's too full or the bucket's too empty. Either way, it wasn't working. There wasn't enough of me and there wasn't enough of my brain to go around. So I forget your original question, actually, but I hope that answered it.
Yeah, that was the question. And thanks for the words of wisdom. My wife and I are trying at the moment, and I do hold some concern about what it's going to be like. But I
was about to say, good luck with that, but that sounds really a bit too pithy, I think. So a genuine
I'll hold on to the... Thank you. And I'll hold on to the part you said as well, that neurodivergent kids are awesome. That hopefully there'll be some positive parts to it too.
Absolutely. They are so much fun, and they're so interesting and cool and funny, but there are for sure some challenges. And I mean, with my son, the thing that I didn't know, which if I'd known earlier would have really helped, is that a lot of ADHDers don't make enough melatonin, right? So my son's just never been able to get to sleep. Now he takes melatonin and he gets to sleep and he has sleep. And people say, oh, you're not worried about giving him that. I'm like, I'm more worried about the developmental effects of a child not sleeping or being sleep deprived for years on end, because I know what that does to our brain. So yeah, I'm less worried about giving him a supplement every night. I don't want to say it doesn't knock him out, but it gives him what he needs, because if he doesn't get that, and this is what we struggled with as a toddler, he will just lie in bed tossing and turning for 90 minutes. Getting more and more frustrated with himself. And that's not fair on him.
Yeah, absolutely not. Coming back to after the diagnosis journey, you were saying that it felt a little bit unclear about what to do next. What changes happened for you apart from starting the YouTube channel?
Well, As a result of starting the YouTube channel, I think I just became really interested in autism. I had obviously done a lot of research before that in preparation for my diagnosis. It really became a special interest. Psychology's always been a special interest, but autism and neurodiversity in general became something that I just really enjoyed learning about. And I suppose my background in psychology made that easier to digest information as well and add it to my network of knowledge. This is a very internal process in my brain, my network of knowledge in my head. During that time, my channel was growing and I was meeting more people online and creating content and learning about different things. And in the Netherlands, after diagnosis, you do get access to a coach. They assess how much you need support. And so I was assigned, I think, 2 hours a week. Coach would come to my house and help me with certain things. Going through that process was very helpful just in coming to terms with everything, really. It's a really long process after diagnosis that where you look back in your life and think, oh, that's why that happened, or that's why I reacted that way. And there's a lot to put together. And for me, I mean, what is it now? It's 5 years since I started my channel, so a bit longer since I was diagnosed. It really took me, I would say, at least 3 years to process everything and come to a stage where I was like, oh, I actually understand myself now. I can't say I fully understand myself. I think we're all on that journey, right? But there was a good few years of processing. For people who are recently diagnosed, I would say just be patient. It will come. Keep learning, connect with other people, talk to trusted family members and loved ones and things like that, and it will come.
It's an important message for me to hear as well, because I was diagnosed, well, somewhere between 7 and 3 years ago, but it can still feel like there are days where a lot of things are a struggle. Patience is important.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be a way to get to really radically accepting yourself as well. The bad parts and the parts where you examine where is the shame coming from and actually looking at that and say, okay, so what if I can't do this? It's just a part of who I am, right? Like I know that I can't do this and maybe I just have to pay for someone to help me with this for the rest of my life, but maybe that's okay. I live in a very individualized society. The UK is also a very individualistic society where you sort of are encouraged to not need people. And it's not a bad thing to rely on people. It's not a bad thing to need people. And there's a lot of political rhetoric about people who rely on the system, right? Like the implication being that we should all just be absolutely independent from each other. We should all just be perfect little working machines. And that's just not true. Humans evolved in community, and a lot of that's been destroyed through recent decades of, I don't want to get too political, but, we're all sitting in, some of us nuclear families, or some of us even living alone, looking at our little screens and like, where is the community connection these days in a lot of our lives? And this idea that like, oh yeah, it's shameful to struggle with this because you need somebody to sit there and watch you while you do tasks or body double or whatever. Well, maybe you just need that person. Maybe that person's happy to help you. I can't try to think of a good summary of that, but I just think we have to let go of that. We have to allow ourselves to need people and need things and need support.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message. So otherwise it just ends up potentially in a worse situation if there's a rejection of support. That I've been through periods where I tried to just operate on my own and the result was burnout, whereas accepting support seems to result in less burnout.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
And it's great to hear about the support available in the Netherlands as well, the concept of an autism coach. I haven't really heard of that in Australia. There are, yes, support workers, but I like the idea of a coach as well. I've got an ADHD coach, but maybe I should look into an autism coach.
Oh, well, they probably do more or less the same thing, I would say. It's really just about the kind of the system and how it's set up here. But I mean, my autism coach, certainly initially, he helped me with probably a lot of things that turned out to be ADHD, actually. So I've had a few coaches because, sometimes they come and go. I've had a few coaches since then, and they've helped me with planning my week is a really big one. If I don't have somebody sitting there and saying, okay, plan your week, right? My week is just like in the ocean or something. I just get pulled by the tides. What's going on here? If I have a plan for my week, then it helps a lot. But I cannot sit down and do that by myself, for the most part anyway. Or I can do it for 1 week when they're off or something, but then longer term it builds up. So just having that knowledge that, oh, you've got somebody every week and this is something that will happen every week. It won't if you take that support away from me. I'm just trying to think what else. Sometimes they've made phone calls for me. For me, I find especially like medical appointments and making appointments and things like that, talking to doctors is very stressful. So that's something that they support with. And writing emails, which is less of a problem now, because if it's an email where I don't quite know what to say, I'll run it into either ChatGPT or Goblin Tools. I don't know if have you used Goblin Tools before?
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. Oh my gosh. If you have an email that you've written and you're like, I always have this thing I need to show it to someone to be like, does this sound okay? Goblin Tools has a function where you paste in your email and it says what tone, how you're coming across to the other person, right? And then you can also change the tone. You can say, can you make this friendlier or more formal or less formal or something like that? I'm sure you could do that with ChatGPT as well, but I just really like Goblin Tools. And I think it was developed by a neurodivergent person for neurodivergent people. So the email stuff, sometimes for me, it's just about, I'm stuck. I'm like, I don't know how to reply to this like slightly maybe socially difficult email or something like that. And a coach can help for sure, but the language models are quicker and they generally do a better job than either human would do. So that's something that has been an interesting and unexpected addition to my life in the last year or so, is using that, because I can sit there and struggle for an hour and agonize on this email, but I don't have to. It's really just another form of support.
Yeah.
But coming back to the coach, my current coach is really about helping me sustain a good work-life balance. This is something that I help people do and struggle with myself. So it's always like the coach needs a coach, or we all need support from other people. And so she helps me figure out, are you actually putting enough me time in this week? What we're planning our week? What can you do to take the burden off here or something like that? And so that's been very helpful. So an autism coach, it's not really about autism. It's just I suppose a general life coach for autistic people, with focusing on some of the struggles that we might specifically have.
Sounds amazing. I'm thinking maybe that's how I should be spending some of my time with my ADHD coach, actually looking at my week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it sounds like by using those supports, you're really able to lean into some of the strengths and the special interests around content creation and research. I imagine in the past you didn't have a YouTube channel and you didn't write books.
It's funny you should say that. I did actually self-publish a book about 12 years ago. It did not go well because I didn't realize I had ADHD and I did not do anything to control that. I don't think at that point the autism was the problem, really. I always call them like their little characters inside my head or something. But, autism for me helps me do deep dives into topics and organize information, and really it's linked to that sort of knowledge side of me. And the ADHD is just like, I'm going to quit my job and publish a book. So that was August, right? And I'm like, I'm going to write a Christmas recipe book. And in my head, I thought I'd planned it, because I was like, well, it's 3 months to November. Let's say I want to publish at the end of November, which means that's 90 days or whatever. So I've got 20 recipes. How much can I do in 90 days? So that's like one recipe every 4.5 days. That's easy, because then all I have to do is like bake it, test it, maybe bake it again, take the photos, write it up. Like, that's so easy, right? And the worst part is that I actually did get it published by that point, but I burnt out for like 6 months after that, because I'd just spent 3 months solidly. I hadn't taken a day off. I hadn't factored that in. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just thinking that I really wanted to be successful and I really wanted to do this. I didn't take a day off in that time. I spent like 3 months eating cake, which was not a really good thing for my health at the time either. And I published it and just squeaked by to get it out by the end of November. But I hadn't done any marketing. Like, nobody bought it. Because I didn't have time to do any marketing. Like, I didn't tell anyone about this book. I was like, well, it'll be on my website. People will buy it. No, that's not how it works. And I was like, oh, I really only have 2 weeks to sell this thing, because nobody's going to buy a Christmas baking book in January either. So it was an extreme lack of planning. It was just, I'm just going to dive into this thing and I'm going to do it. And it'll be amazing because I'll be published a book. But honestly, it was kind of a shit show. Are we allowed to swear on this? It was a shit show.
Yep. We'll try and redeem it. We'll include a link to all of your books in our show notes.
You can't, it's not available to buy. I've got a box of them in the back here. So, if anyone wants to buy a book, this is coming. But yeah, I was able to write the book, but I was not able to do it in a way that was in any way, like, I would not recommend that method to anyone. But then when it came around to this workbook that I did do, I did not burn out. And I'm very proud of myself for not burning out, because I realized I had to do this way more sensibly. I started it in February. I did 60% of it in a week. And then I stopped because I hated it and I thought it was rubbish. But that's okay. So I took 3 months off. I came back to it. It was not a process that a neurotypical person would recognize, but it absolutely was a working process that is probably familiar to many ADHDers. But that's okay, and it still worked. And I measured the success also by how I felt at the end of it, because I felt prepared and ready to publish and calm. And that feeling was something that I'd never had in my whole life. I was always like last minute stress, rush, cram it in, haven't planned it properly. That was my go-to for all through school, all through university. That was how I worked. And learning to work in this different way is really nice. It's less stressful. Really nice way of working. That's something that I work with my clients to develop into a little bit more of a sustainable way of working.
Samantha, could you say a bit more about your YouTube channel? You mentioned a few things like the monetization model and like the lower barrier to entry of starting a YouTube channel. Was it mainly those things, or was it something else that really gave you the push to start?
Well, like I said, I always thought it was kind of cool, the idea that you could be a YouTuber and like make money off it, because probably because like I think a lot of autistic people feel that way. I can record stuff at home and make money. So that was something I honestly, like for the 10 years before that, I was interested in starting YouTube. I did not have the confidence to do that. I put a couple of videos up. I think I got one mean comment. I say mean comment. It was an anti-Semitic comment. It was actually quite horrible, and it wouldn't get past these filters today. But I had that comment and I was just like, no, I'm not going to do this. And it took me a while to get the confidence to start that again and actually think that I could do it. So when I had that moment where I was on, coming to the realization about autism, I had a small baby and I was watching loads of YouTube, and I was watching YouTube about YouTube, which is the meta part of YouTube, where you're watching about how to build the channel and best practices and all of that kind of stuff. And I suppose it became a little bit of a special interest. I became really interested in how everything came together. The idea of saying, okay, you have to do your keyword research and you put that in your titles and your description, and then how to structure a script and all these different things. I just became really fascinated by all these ideas about making best practice YouTube videos and then using that to have growth and the potential that could come from growth on YouTube, because I still think it's quite unique in the social media world. Other platforms do have monetization features, but they're not anywhere near as generous as YouTube. And YouTube's really, unless you take a lot of brand deals, which I don't particularly like to do too much of. I do a couple, but I don't do a lot. But that's the only way to survive on other platforms like Instagram and TikTok. TikTok's a whole other thing, I think. So I just thought like, oh, this was something I could do. I really liked editing videos. I've been into editing videos since, I don't know, who else would remember Windows Movie Maker? Was it in the 90s or the 2000s? Like program. Making funny little videos, making clips and stuff like that. So I knew that was a skill that I had a very basic level of. It just seemed very appealing to me. And I think that basic level hasn't lost its appeal in that way. I think what's changed with me is that I've expanded my business so much that YouTube and video content in general is so time intensive. I love being on podcasts now because I get to have content made that I do not have to edit, because, the editing process on a short video probably takes me 5 hours at least. 6 hours, and on a longer video or a complicated one with lots of B-roll and lots of different things, it takes much longer. So it's a really time-intensive thing, and I've got other things to focus on at the moment.
What are the other things that you like to get up to when you're not writing the book and making video coaching clients?
So I'm now signed to write a book. This is not going to be a workbook. This is going to be a word book. You know what I mean? It's going to be written. Right? So I've got a deadline. Next July is my deadline. And it's actually quite interesting, the process of planning this, because I was very, very excited to sign. I thought it's really nice to be signed with a publisher. And then I thought, okay, I've got a year. I've got a minimum of 60,000 words to deliver. How am I going to do this so that I don't get into this point where it's got to March next year and I'm having to scramble for words? I'm not somebody who can do something a little bit every day. I prefer to work in an intensive fashion. So I'm kind of like leaning in a little bit to the ADHD there. because I know that I don't have this consistency in me. But what I do have is the ability to write a lot in a short amount of time. So yesterday I sat down in the morning and I put 2,000 words, I say, onto paper, onto the screen. And then I thought, yeah, that's good. I know it was 2,500 actually. And that felt really good. And so if I can do that every week, then I can keep up to my word count easily. And that's just one morning. Leaning into that, I do like to work intensively and hyper focus and then take a break. And if you plan it out, you can work like that, but not in a way where you're having to hyper focus to finish a project, because that's where the risk of burnout comes, is where you haven't planned it right. So I have planned it and I plan to hyper focus, but I've also planned a lot of time around those sessions of hyper focus. So that's how I'm doing the book as it goes. I'll report back in a year to see how it worked. What else am I doing? So I mentor business clients, people who are neurodivergent and generally one-person business owners, not always though. And I help them with strategy, which is pretty much what I described in terms of, I've got to write a book and I've got this deadline. How am I going to get this done? Or basically asking, what is your goal, whether that is to publish a game or to get monetized on YouTube or whatever their strategy, whatever their goal might be with working with me. And then we figure out a way to get there, filling in the steps, and I keep them on track for accountability, which is really nice. So I'm sort of like part strategist, part mentor, part cheerleader, that sort of thing. But it's really wonderful to work with neurodivergent people and people who are ambitious and, I don't want to say strong-willed is the wrong word, but they know what they want and they know they want to get there, but they just need a little bit of help to do that. And then, of course, the retreats. You mentioned that the Wild Brains retreat that I ran in July. It was a wonderful success and it really filled up my cup in a way. Filled up my cup, that's a metaphor. I didn't realize this is what I'd been missing, was this connection. I had a sense that I felt, especially when I was just doing YouTube, I felt very lonely. It's a very solitary thing. People think, oh, you have all these subscribers. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not in my house, are they? They're a number on a screen. It's very hard to actually conceptualize people once you get past a certain amount. And making videos and then putting it out there, and then all you get back is comments, right? And that can be for better or worse. So I knew that I wanted to work more closely with people. And then I was working more closely with people, like, no, closer. So in real life. And that was really wonderful because I don't think I'd ever been in a situation where it was a group of entirely neurodivergent people for, it was 3 days. And there was something quite special that happened. It was, can't even quite explain it. But I just got overwhelming feedback from other people and also from myself that this was something that I should do again. So I'm going to be running 3 in 2025. I was about to say 2015. No, 10 years out, 2025. There's going to be 3. Going to do another one in the Netherlands, one in the UK, and one in California.
And 2026, come to Australia, please.
Maybe. Thinking about something about Iceland. There's a solar eclipse in Iceland in 2026. That might be on the cards. Australia just seems like a very long way away.
Oh, it is. It's so far away.
So far away.
I was like what you were saying about the giving yourself time to hyper focus and also having space around those periods as well. A common advice people often get, especially when it comes to creativity, is do a little bit every day. And you were mentioning that advice didn't quite work for you, Samantha. I was wondering, is there any other advice that people throw around a lot, productivity advice that doesn't quite work for you?
I absolutely hate that do a bit every day, because for my brain, I wouldn't like to say for other people's brain, for my brain, a bit every day is boring, right? It's like, oh, you do 500 words a day. That's so boring. I would rather really like spend a couple of hours getting super focused on it, getting into that really nice flow state in my brain, and then go, okay, I'm done, and not think about it for a little bit. And I think in terms of the productivity advice, sure, writing 500 words a day works. And I think many ADHDers know that doesn't work, but you have to understand why it doesn't work. And then you have to say, okay, I like this, but I know that if I do it like this, it's going to burn me out or it's not going to work. So that's how I make that's probably a bit confusing way of saying it. But you're saying the productivity advice. I struggle with this one a little bit because I think, what productivity advice is there? The productivity advice that has worked for me has been to do less, actually. So I would say that the thing that really doesn't work is this idea of hustle culture and working hard being equal to working long hours. there's a lot of this. I don't want to stereotype. It's usually men saying this, saying you got to put in the work, you got to do this. Actually, you can build a business and be quite lazy about it. You not lazy, that's really the wrong word, but you don't have to work a lot of hours. You can be efficient. That's the word. So for example, the program where I work with my clients, it's a group program. I wouldn't be able to work with all these clients one-on-one because I would burn out. I can't imagine having 90-minute sessions with every single one of my clients every single week. It would not be good for me. I can give my energy to people far better if it's a little bit more compressed, because I can do in 15 minutes what somebody else takes 90 minutes to do. I'm doing that to work for me. I also think the group model is fantastic for the people involved because it gives this sort of sense of community. Like, we're not doing it on our own. We're all struggling actually with very similar problems. And hearing other people talk about things that you've struggled with is very validating. So I like to give space. I say that having had a really, really packed week. And today I have no space in my day at all. I say I like to give space in my week. In theory, I try to plan things so that I do not have to work long hours, because I cannot work long hours because I have 2 young children. And so everything I do has to be fit into school hours, basically. A lot of people say, oh, working evenings and weekends. I can't do that, because by the time it gets to 7 o'clock and I'm putting my son to bed, I'm falling asleep on his floor. So in some ways, my decreased physical energy is actually a good thing, because it's got me into a very healthy rhythm of boundaries in the evenings and weekends, because I haven't been able to work on that. Of course, sometimes I'll give the kids to my husband and say, I just need to go up and do some work on a Saturday or something, but it's only when it has to be done.
Sounds like a really healthy attitude. So healthy, in fact,
it's sort of
that
forced
I feel...
on me. It was a forced attitude, but it's worked out quite well. So
Well, you've inspired me. So we're going to take a break right now to enforce that attitude for everyone.
Hi there, Focus and Chillers. Are you ready to supercharge your knowledge in the realms of creativity, tech, and psychology? Come check out my fortnightly newsletter. In each edition, you'll get quick wins and actionable takeaways that you can put into practice right away. If this sounds like you, I'd love to have you as a reader. Subscribe for your fortnightly dose of insights. The link is in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show.
Right, we're back from our break and we're keen to hear about your morning routine. What's it like, Samantha?
Well, I know that in the productivity world, there's a lot of people who have very exciting and elaborate morning routines. Mine's quite boring. It's really about survival basics, I think. My youngest child is 3, so she still occasionally screams herself awake. Actually, maybe she wakes up fine and she just screams for us, but we're usually awakened by the sound of one or many screaming children. And then really it's about tending to their needs, getting them, getting lunches packed, dressed, teeth brushed, out the door kind of thing. And then a lot of the times I try and get a workout in the mornings. I try and do that twice a week, or maybe go for a walk, tidy up the kitchen, reset for the day, and put a load of laundry in. Like, it's pretty mundane stuff. I would love to have a routine where I put on some incense and meditate and do an hour of yoga, but it's not very realistic in my life. Maybe when the kids are older, I'll have that sort of a luxurious morning routine.
Yeah, and I consider hanging the washing on the line a form of meditation for me.
Well, good for you. I can't say I share that love. We were actually thinking about I looked into it, getting a laundry service for $150 a month. You can get someone to pretty much do all our laundry. I was very tempted, actually.
That
sounds like a good deal.
Yeah. Samantha, could you tell us a bit about your sleep and how you switch off at night?
I've always been, I don't want to say heavy sleeper. I've always liked sleep, and I've always found it relatively easy to get to sleep, which I know is not relatable to probably many listeners. But, having kids is a big sleep disruptor, and I try and prioritize an early night as best I can. For the last couple of years, it's been more like 9 o'clock, but now I might finally be getting out of sleep deprivation, so it might be more like 10 o'clock. I don't have a particularly healthy sleep routine, because I just don't have a lot of trouble getting to sleep. So it's a question of, once the kids are in bed, it's the double screen thing. I think that might be familiar to a lot of listeners. You have something on the TV, and then you have your little screen to keep you happy while you're watching TV. It does wind me down a little bit, but there are some days where I'm just too exhausted to do anything wholesome. I have in the past done things like playing the piano. I have a digital piano that I can put headphones on. That's quite a nice way. But in terms of winding down, even by the time it gets to 8 o'clock, I could fall asleep at 8 o'clock, to be honest. I think it's probably a bit of a boring one. I'd love to say, yeah, I journal about the day and all of these things. I sometimes journal, but at the moment, I would say that my energy in terms of routines and habits is going in towards my work, right? So this sort of lifestyle stuff would be really nice to do, but at the moment it's more about just keeping everybody in the house alive and fed and making sure everyone gets enough sleep. Maybe like this is
sounds
another one.
important.
Maybe when the kids are older, I'll do something, some elaborate evening routine with like a 10-step skincare or whatever, but not right now.
No, fair enough. If people wanted to double screen while listening to or watching something interesting, where would they find your YouTube channel?
Where would they find my YouTube channel? You can find my YouTube channel. It's called YoSandySam. I've never actually spelled it out before. Now this is a challenge, isn't it?
We'll include it.
Sandy, Sam. You'll link it. I'm occasionally on Instagram. It's like my secondary social media. But you can also look at my website, YoSandySam.com, where you can find pretty much links to everything, I think, on there. I do have a podcast as well. I've done 3 episodes so far. I've got one that's been waiting to be edited for, I think, 4 months now. So I should probably get on that. And that's called Awkward Conversations. So if you want to check out that podcast, that would be nice. And my workbook is available on Amazon worldwide. And I think that's about it. But really, if you go to YoSandySam.com, that's the best place to find information about everything, including if you want to work with me as a business client.
Well, Samantha, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Do you have any final words or asks for our audience?
This is like, oh, I forgot we were going to have this pithy question. Do I have any final words? I forgot to actually think about this one, didn't I? That's very awkward. No, I would say that it's really important to understand yourself. The process after diagnosis and truly understanding yourself, what we were talking about at the beginning, understanding and acceptance has been the key to transforming myself from this person that quit job and then published a very unsuccessful book 12 years ago to somebody that did not burn out when I do these projects anymore. And that transformation is absolutely possible. I will also say, there was a period of ADHD meds, which also really, really helped a lot. Being very conscious about healthy working styles for an ADHD or an autistic person is really, really important. And like just being mindful of burnout on your shoulder all the time, thinking, you don't want to be there. You do not want to go there because it's so hard to get out.
Wonderful. We'll wrap the show with that.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.